Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, aka Jay Mason. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Album Cover, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. With me right now, I have a man that's career has spanned decades, from Sons of Champlin to Chicago. He's worked with various artists, written songs that we all know and love still to this day. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give the flowers, the whole bouquet flower shop, to the one and only Bill Champlin. Mr. Champlin, thank you for coming on Beyond the Album Cover, sir, and it's an honor.
Sure enough, Jarrell. Good to hear you.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. So let's go ahead and just jump right on in. So I
Yeah.
believe you were raised in Mill Valley, California, which is 14 miles from San Francisco and 52 miles from Napa Valley, correct?
Yeah, kind of generally in that neck of the woods. It's just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, pretty much.
Okay. So what was life like for you growing up out there, and who were some of the people that inspired you to want to go into music from a young age?
Well, I mean, my mother was a like a piano player and a singer and a songwriter. She didn't really do much with it, but she had a certain level of training and so I kind of she sort of put me in a when I was a kid and she put me in a playpen and put me underneath the piano and played a good portion of the day. So I was kind of raised with noise. You know what I mean?
hmm Now, what was the one radio station you remember growing up that you had listened to constantly, and some of the jocks that you remember being like, man,
Oh,
they
that
play
had to
great
be
records?
yeah, it had to be KDIA 1320, I think, on the dial. Their transmitter, I think, was right at the toll booth for the Bay Bridge, right in Oakland. And KDIA, I mean, I've one of their one of their best disc jockeys at one point was Sly Stone, their Sylvester Stewart.
Yeah, for
You
those that
know,
don't know, he started out as a disc jockey.
what a talented guy that guy was.
Yeah,
Oh my
yes,
goodness.
yes, he was. And
Yeah.
as of the recording of this podcast on June 14th, a couple of days ago, we just lost Sly Stone. So can you just talk about his influence and what it meant not only to music, but for the whole Bay Area music scene?
Well, I think at some level, a lot of people didn't realize he was from the Bay Area. He had produced he produced Bobby Freeman in the early days. I think he was one of the first guys to put a click track on a or to put a metronome on a track and then stack all the instruments himself, and that he did when he was a teenager. So him, and there was a couple of disc jockeys in that were also in the record business, Bobby Mitchell and Tom Donahue, and they hired Sly. I think when Sly was still a teenager to produce the Bobby Freeman record. He produced Bo Brummel's. Remember Laugh Laugh? That was Sly's
Mhm,
production. And
mhm.
I think he was. I don't even think he was even 20 yet. It was a young guy, very talented young guy. Played
Yeah,
every instrument. Just amazing, amazing dude.
yeah, Mr. Do It
He had
All.
some demons that were chasing him down in the last part of his life, but in the early part, he just was amazing. He's just an amazing. And I think the stand album, like I said, was our version of. It was for sure it was his Sergeant Pepper. I mean, that was an amazing record.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely check out the documentary that Questlove put out on Sly Stone a couple of months back. And also, Sly Stone did a
I saw that.
memoir before he passed.
Yeah,
I saw
I
the
saw
documentary,
that.
it was really good.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know, maybe a month ago, and Tam and I were almost crying at some point toward the end of it. It was like, wow, just he really he had a rough time. He definitely had a rough time. And I've done some vocal dates around L.A. and stuff like that with his little sister uh, oh God, just the whole family was just amazing.
Hmm
And I know Greg Errico pretty well, and it's just that band was just on fire, and I think a lot of it, just something that we all kind of learned from was you play a regular steady gig for any period of time and have enough rehearsal time, you can really put together an amazingly great band. And those guys played, I think, 4 nights or 5 nights a week at a club called Winchester Cathedral, which I think was in either Redwood City or Palo Alto. It was down the peninsula a ways.
Yeah, very tight. Sly Stone's legacy forever cemented, and then also a day or so later, we lost Brian Wilson from the
Yeah.
Beach Boys. So talk about him and just the Beach Boys' influence and the Pet Sounds album and how it reshaped modern pop music.
Well, yeah. I mean, Brian, a friend of mine who had passed away quite a bit later is a guy named Gary Usher, who lived across the street from the Wilson family, and he would hear Brian on one side of the house uh, playing like the Letterman and playing vocal groups with great harmonies and stuff like that, and on the other side of the house is Carl Wilson playing along with Chuck Berry. And Gary from across the street went, they should put this together. So he went, actually knocked on the door. And Gary co-wrote In My Room and I think Surfer Girl, some of those early things. And Brian was just really good with vocal harmonies. He was great.
Yeah, the production, because when you listen to Pet Sounds, especially on headphones, you could really hear the harmonies, the
Yeah,
layers, the
yeah.
production methods. And I believe Paul McCartney mentioned in interviews that because of Pet Sounds, that inspired the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's what I've heard. I worked on actually, I was working with Gary on Gary Usher, and he had Brian in on a thing. It was me and Tom Kelly, who's another great singer and songwriter. It was me and Tom Kelly, and I think Brian, the three of us were doing backgrounds on a thing. And Brian, as much of it's funny because both Sly and Brian both had they had demons chasing them down pretty regularly, but Brian was really a good good musician in a lot of ways. I mean
Right.
that you don't kind of expect from rock and roll guys. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, and those harmonies, best in the business. Like I said, definitely listen to Pet Sounds
Yeah,
on headphones though, so you can really truly appreciate the full genius of Brian Wilson's songwriting and production.
yeah.
Now, how did Sons of Champlin form?
Well, we were playing in a band through high school, which we call the Opposite Six, which was pretty interesting. But we weren't using brass by any means, but we had a couple of horn players, a couple of sax players, so we were using reeds a little bit, and that was during high school, and then this was during the period of time when the draft was grabbing people like crazy. So right after I graduated from high school, most of the guys in the band ended up joining the army to avoid being drafted. Now, think about that for a minute. So you could join for 3 years, but you had a shot at becoming like, getting in the band or doing something other than just being in a foxhole in Vietnam.
Mhm.
So we were dealing with Vietnam at the time. So then the Sons were basically, I was already married and had a kid, so there was no way they were going to draft me because I started pretty early on that level. They couldn't draft me because I was married and had a child. We had our sax player Tim Kaine had polio when he was younger, so he was in the band. So Tim and I started the band, and we had a couple of asthmatics, and we just found the guys that weren't being drafted and put that together and called it. I can't remember what we called it, but we ended up. They ended up, because I was already a dad, the guys were calling me Father Champlin. So somehow it ended up with Sons of Champlin.
Right. Right now,
You
who are
know,
some of your musical references for Sons of Champlin? Were you guys more influenced by Motown, Stax, Mamas, Papas, everything that was coming out of the Haight-Ashbury district in San Fran at that time? Who are some of your
I
reference points that you
yeah, I
guys
didn't
use?
I didn't listen that much to what was going on with the dead in the airplane, and I was happy for them that they were all doing well. And we used to do a lot of gigs with Quicksilver Messenger Service, but I was listening more to what was going on across the bay in Oakland. So mostly because of KDIA. One of my favorite singers to this day was Lou Rawls. I just loved his phrasing, his back phrasing. First of all, he had the sexiest voice in the world because it's this low, beautiful voice. Of course, when he laughed, he sounded like Theodore or Alvin. It was a squeaky little laugh. And then he'd start singing, it's like, you'll never find. It's so great. We ended up becoming pretty good friends, and I ended up working on one of his albums that Jay Graydon was producing quite a few years later. But he didn't know it. He was my singing teacher when I first started. I'd come home after school, and throw on a couple of Lou, one or two of Lou's albums, and just cop his groove. He's just such a he's really on the back end of it. I mean, everybody said D'Angelo, man, he backphrases everything. I said, well, Lou was doing this 35 years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you think about everything that comes out of Oakland, you think of, like we mentioned, Sly and the Family Stone. You got Graham Central Station. Larry Graham was in Sly and the Family Stone. Then you
Yeah.
have Sheila E. and the Escovedo family, George Duke, Tony.
Well, I
Then
went to
later,
I went to high school with George Duke. He lived in Marin County.
oh, please tell us about
Yeah.
George Duke.
Yeah. Oh God, what he was an amazing musician then. When I was in junior high school, my sister was doing the high school music teacher. One of the two music teachers in the high school is a guy named Bob Greenwood, who had my sister singing in a Giancarlo Menotti opera, and he had George playing piano on it. I mean, he couldn't, nobody in the orchestra could cut this music. The music was really hard to do. And George was reading it. He just, I read the fly shit off the page. I mean, this was when he was I think he was a junior in high school. I
Wow.
think I was a freshman when George was a junior. So I kind of knew him before I was even before I even got into high school. I knew him before that because he had been playing behind some stuff that my sister was doing.
Right, and I believe Sheila E. before she broke out was playing under George Duke as well. And when you listen to like his earlier stuff like Dookie Stick, Reach For It, it definitely has that element of Parliament in there. Because at first, when listening to those records, you can be like, "Oh, this sounds like a Parliament record," but it's actually George Duke.
Yeah, well, George he was. I mean, he could turn around. I mean, I think his first record that he played a solo on was on a can't remember. It might have been a Stan Kenton record. We all knew it was going to fly. We all knew George was gonna go through the roof at some point of the game, and he did. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I kind of kept in touch with him over the years. I wrote one of the tunes on one of his fusion albums, a song called "Don't Forget to Party Down." It matter down. It was R&B ditty.
Hmm.
And Bobby Colomby from Blood, Sweat, and Tears put me and George together, thinking that we didn't know each other, and it turned out that we'd known each other for years. So it was
Hmm.
kind of funny. Say, hey, look what I put together. I said, well, I didn't really put this together. We've known each other for a long time. And I saw George maybe I think about a year before Corrine passed away, and then another year after that, George passed away.
Hmm. And then back.
Sweetie Pie, man, what a beautiful musician he was. Just
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I remember, as a kid seeing, the end credits for Soul Train and seeing TSOP 87 and seeing George Duke's name and then going back and listening to his earlier stuff. I'm like, wow, very funky.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 I mean, he had the groove going, and he knew. We were looking at he could have been a jazz musician. I mean, gone out with a upright bass player and a drummer, and he could have done that, and that would have been great. But it wouldn't have. I don't think it would have paid the bills at the level of what he finally ended up doing.
Right, right.
And right around the time that I think that Miles was starting to do funk, and that funk was starting to take over a lot of different things like that. And George was right in the middle of it. I mean, he was just such a great musician that he could do anything, you
Right,
know.
right. And back to the original question about the Bay Area. What is it about the Bay Area where you have all these great acts coming out and carrying on the lineage to this day of going out, going to get it yourself, hustling? And, when we saw the emergence of rap, you had Hammer, Too Short, E40 carrying on the tradition laid by those funk acts coming
Oh yeah,
from the Bay Area. What is it about the Bay
absolutely.
Area?
Well, I mean, it's just the nature of the. I think it's the sourdough bread in the Bay Area that cause it's either that or there's something in the water. But there's always been pretty good musicians. I grew up in Marin County, which is a little bit different than Oakland. Although I used to get on the Richmond San Rafael Bridge and go over to Oakland to buy all my records at Reed's Records in Berkeley.
Hmm.
It was either Berkeley or Emeryville. It was right along San Pablo Avenue right there, and I just couldn't find those records in Mill Valley. Later on, after I moved down to Los Angeles, there was a record store in Mill Valley. They started to get hip to like the cool records to have
Hmm.
to sell, and they sort of brought it up.
Yes, I'm sure there were some spots that were not Tower Records that you would go to that had the obscure stuff, the stuff that you probably had to get on special order because this was back
Yeah,
before everything was digital, where you
yeah,
either had it in stock at the store or the clerk had to order it for you, or you got in real good with somebody that worked there and they'll look out for you
yeah.
and set some aside.
This was one of the reasons why Sly Stone was such a good disc jockey. He brought his own stash of obscure, pretty obscure R&B records that we were listening to on the radio, going, "Whoa, what is this? Where did this come from?" Because I mean, Marin County is kind of a sort of a upper middle class, sort of basically a white, you know,
Mhm.
county. With the exception of Marin City, was the only place where there was any color at all. And I mean, I went to school with most of those guys, like with George Duke and with I mean, other people, Mark Isham went to Tamalpais High School. It's Mill Valley High School there. A lot of really good musicians came in and out of there.
Okay.
Bill Gibson, from the drummer from Huey Lewis and the News, went to Tamalpais High School, and he's playing with the Suns now
Wow.
because the
Wow.
Suns are still playing.
Wow. That is amazing. And Sons of Champlin, you started doing session work and everything. Was it around this time where you hooked up with Jay Graydon and David Foster? Can you tell us about that? How you guys ended up linking up?
Well, the move was is that the Suns got up. We decided at some point in the game maybe we should start using producers. So we our record company Areola Records hooked us up with Keith Olsen to produce a record, and some of the songs that I brought in, we cut the tracks, and Keith finally said, one or two of these ballads, you got to get strings on them, and I know just the guy. So I went from the studio. We were working at Sound City in Van Nuys. I went from the studio and over to David Foster's apartment, and we met. And David had already heard cassettes. How about that? That's going back a ways. Had heard cassettes of the music that we'd done, and he had already arranged some of it, and I just fell in love with his arrangements. His string arrangements are amazing, and we just kind of hit it off. So then David started producing records. I think he started off with the Keene brothers, and then went to J.P. Morgan, and he brought me and Donnie Gerard in to sing backgrounds on some of it. Donnie was the lead singer on Wildflower, which was a record out of Canada that Foster produced when
Mm-hmm.
he was a teenager. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
By Skylark.
yeah, yeah, with Skylark. Yeah, it was David and his wife BJ, and Donnie and a couple other players, really good players. So, David started kind of bringing me in as a ringer on, as a vocal. I think for different projects that he was doing. So, man, I'm wild about working
Mm-hmm.
because
So,
Marin County and San Francisco Bay Area was starting to dry up for me.
right,
It was becoming Sound Like the Dead or Don't Play at all,
right,
and
right.
I was kind of leaning toward the R&B side of the coin
Mm-hmm.
rather than the psychedelic side. Although I like that music, it just wasn't me. It really wasn't my kind of thing. It's like the same thing with rap and hip hop. It's not quite my, it's not the art form that I grew up digging. I mean, I've definitely grabbed some of the grooves. I think Snoop, his records always grew,
Yeah, for sure.
always in the pocket.
For sure. For
And any of
sure.
the Dr. Dre stuff is always smoking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. Now, with session work during that time frame, was it more of a you got to get in with somebody in order to get work, or was it more freelance? You look at trades to see who needs what, call and show up.
Well, I think what happened is when I finally made the move to Los Angeles, I bailed out of the Suns. I said that's about enough because we tried everything. We just couldn't get over the career hump. We couldn't get over the hump. It was just as simple as that. And I finally said, I got to do something else because I had been flying down to LA working with David on some different projects that he was doing at the very early part of his production. So what ended up happening is I moved there, and then I met with Graydon, with Jay, because David and Jay are still joined at the hip. They're really really good musical partners. They did Airplay together, which was a really cool little record. It really kind of changed a lot of people's minds about music. But I was kind of the vocal of I was the vocal ringer for some of David's productions, and what kind of happened is when I moved into town, Jay Graydon and David Foster were both doing a lot of tracking dates for records, and they were really both of them were really super. As they'd give my phone number to the producer and say, "Well, when it comes time to do background vocals, call this guy. He'll do you really well." So they kind of got me my first gigs, and then the work I did on my first gigs got me my second and third and fourth gigs.
Mm,
So the next thing I knew, I was just kind of waiting to go in and do a solo album, which I ended up doing, single album. I ended up doing with David, and so while I was waiting for that, I needed to pay the rent. And next thing you know, I was in, I mean, I did one morning. I was singing on a Della Reese record in the morning, and Donnie and Marie in the afternoon. That's opening up your your little scene. You got a little more
mhm,
going on, and Nancy Wilson, and not from Heart, but the original Nancy Wilson, the jazz singer. I did a couple of records with her, and next thing I knew is I was like, so what my dad said. Hey, the definition of an expert's the guy from the next county. I was kind of the new guy at the time,
right.
and managed to get a lot of work doing background vocals when people didn't quite know what to do with background vocals. So I got into arranging. The next thing I knew, I was kind of a, getting a little bit of a rep as a good pop background arranger,
Mm,
which kind of, and I that's still, I still do that. You know what I mean?
yeah, see, folks.
Ensemble vocals is what it's called.
See,
Yeah.
folks, have a dollar, turn it into two, so on and so forth. Now, how did After the Love Is Gone come to be?
David called me. He says, me and Jay got together last night. We came up with a progression. I got the first line of the chorus. After the love is gone. All right. Okay. That's good. He said, we want to do it. And we were right at the tail end of doing my record, the single album. So I wrote the lyrics. I wrote the lyrics on it. Wrote some of the melodies for the verse and B section, and we kind of did a version of it. And David happened to be working as a piano player for Maurice White for an Earth, Wind and Fire record. And while they were running the tape back, David started playing it on piano, and Maurice just came over and went, "What is that?" You know. And David said, "Well, I got a cassette. Let's play it." So they went into the studio and played it. And Maurice said, we can record this if Bill will agree to not release it himself." And David called me and asked me, we live really close to each other, so he came over and he said, "Well, look, this might be a better call to And I played the rest of your album for Maurice. He wanted a couple other songs. I said, "Well, we can let him have After the Love, because my demos hadn't quite hit it the way it should have been."
Mhm.
And they tore it up. I wish I'd have given them the other songs that they wanted.
Right,
Would have. And it was right around when the I Am album came out, so
right.
it was a really cool thing.
Yeah, one of my favorite EWF records. And I also heard that that record was also pitched for Hall and Oates, and they passed on it because they wanted to keep it self-contained with all of their material. Is that true or not? That that was also for Hall and
Well, I know
Oates.
David at the time, I think, was about to record Along the Red Ledge with Hall and Oates, but the Earth, Wind and Fire thing just ended up they offered first. It's pretty much the way it came down.
First
You know,
dibs.
and and uh, and then David was in New York doing the Hall and Oates record, going over knocking on doors at the CBS or Sony, whatever it is now. I think it was CBS at the time, which was which was Earth, Wind and Fire's label. And he was just going, "You got to release this as a single. You really need to." And they said, "No, they're a dance band. They're a boogie band." No, he said, "No, no, no, no. You don't get it. This is going to fly." So finally, just to get David out of their hair, they released After the Love Is Gone, and kaboom, off she took.
Yeah, it
You
paid
know.
big dividends. Now, how tough is it as an artist for you to know, okay, this is a great record, but it may not be a great fit for you and may work well vocally and sonically for this artist? How can you tell that?
That's one of the reasons why artists like myself and most other artists at some level get producers, because it's better for producers to decide what's going on at some level. It's like I'm a pretty good friend with uh, uh, what's God, my memory is just so gone these days. Denise Williams, right?
Mm,
And she got a call to go do "Let's Hear It for the Boy," and she was actually being produced doing an album with George Duke at the time. And George heard the song and went, "Nah, we're not doing that kind of thing." And Denise turned around to him and said, "Oh, yes, we are." If you know Denise, you know how that sounded when she said, "Oh, no, 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 I'll make this decision." So, and it turned out to be a really giant record for
yeah, it became a huge crossover smash, one of the most memorable
her.
songs for
Yeah,
Flashdance, and Denise Williams cut her teeth in Wonderland along with Ray Parker Jr. I think
yeah,
Greg Gaines came out of Wonderland, and so did Michael Sembello, I believe.
yeah. Oh, there's a handful of people that I've run across over the years that are all just ridiculous with a
Mm,
lot of ease. Ridiculous, you know what I mean?
hmm
Ray Parker Jr., you put him on rhythm guitar, forget about it. You're gonna get a pocket that absolutely won't quit.
right, and then
We
with
on
Ray,
my first solo album with David Foster, we the bass player didn't show up at the downbeat, right?
mhm,
And we David said, let's go to the piano. So we went to the piano and came up with a tune which eventually became I Don't Want You Anymore,
wow,
which we had me and Bobby Kimball singing backgrounds on it, singing, ensemble vocals on it. And then and the bass player was David Shields, he showed up after we had cut it. We cut it with Ray and Ray's drummer, Fatback, Larry Talbert, I think was his name. I don't think he's alive anymore, but a really good drummer. And we cut it without a bass player. And when David showed up, we just taught him the parts, and bam, it became one of the songs on my solo album. Because sometimes it just works that way. You just write it in the studio right while you're in there.
hmm
Hey,
and
we got an extra hour. Let's utilize the time and write something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This was back when labels were paying for studio time, and time was definitely money. So you had to make sure all your parts were done, and you wanted to make sure that everything was right because you didn't want no retakes because that was more money that was coming out of the label's pocket or coming out of your advance.
Well, usually it comes out of they may pay for it in advance, but when it comes to royalty time, whatever you spend in the studios is coming out of your pocket. So eventually
Hmm
it comes back to you and me, baby.
Right,
That's the way it's going to work.
right.
And but with David, we would have pretty decent charts, basic charts and landmarks of everything like that. But if an idea came up, uh, which was, I think, one of the reasons why I work with David as much as I did, is he's so creative.
hmm
And it just, he might not have thought of it yesterday, but he thought of it today. And we happen to be in the studio, but there's no reason why we can't put it on the record right now.
Right.
So a lot of the cool ideas on at least my records that I know of, and I know the same thing happened with Tubes and a bunch of other projects that David was producing at the time. If a good idea came up, hell, let's try it. And David always said, let's give it the 5 minute test.
Right.
I mean, I learned a whole lot about, not even so much about playing. I mean, I could kind of look at his hands and see a little bit of what he was doing, which made it a lot of difference for my gig with Chicago, because he was playing piano on a lot of the Chicago stuff,
Right.
the
And
stuff that he produced. And I think he kind of, between him and me, a different management company and a different label, managed to pull Chicago out of a little bit of a slump and right back on top.
right. And transitioning to Chicago, how did you end up in Chicago and finding your role in the group?
Well, I mean, originally I got a call from the management. Howard Kaufman gave me a phone call, and it was like a day or two after Terry had passed away. Terry Kath had passed away.
Mhm,
And we looked at it, he said, hey, Chicago's going to need a guy. And I thought he was talking, I mean, he knew I played guitar, and I do play guitar, but not enough to take the guitar chair. You know what I mean?
mhm,
I got one good solo. Count them, one. you know, and I don't consider myself that much of a guitar player. I mean, if it's needed on stage, I can learn it and figure it out and play it well. And I got pretty good tone and all that's all fine. But I'm just not the guy that should have been taken Terry Kath's place. No way in the world. So I kind of bailed on it at first. Then a couple of years later, they called again and said, "Well, what do you think?" I had been writing with Danny Seraphin, the drummer in Chicago, and then Danny had been producing a demo for a guy named Angelo, great singer, great singer. And me and Peter Cetera were singing backgrounds on this. It was just a demo. And the minute we went to the microphone and started singing together, the guys in the booth were just, their jaws were on the floor. They were going, "This blend is ridiculous." And that's, I think, what got everybody thinking in terms of bringing me into the band.
Okay, yeah, definitely that. And when you first heard Hard to Say I'm Sorry, did you know that that record was going to be a smash, or was it some selling that had to be done for the band to cut it?
That record was done kind of the way it kind of came up the way After the Love Is Gone did. It was right at, I mean, everybody thought that Chicago 16 was over with. We've got all our stuff recorded. All we got to do is sweeten a little bit here and there and get a mix. And then that album will be over with. And all of a sudden, David and Peter come up with Hard to Say I'm Sorry. And they said, "Well, we have to get rid of something else in order to fit this on the record." We were talking vinyl at the time. There's only so much room on a vinyl record. You can maybe make 10 songs if you're lucky. And there was, these a lot of these decisions were made without anybody asking me. I mean, Peter and David were kind of running the show at that point of the game, and I was looking at it as going, they should be. Both of them know what they're doing. I think the rest of the band at that point of the game were still thinking in terms of the material that they were recording before that.
Mhm.
But I think Foster brought them into the at least into the 90s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because when you listen to Hard to Say I'm Sorry, that record was a monster on pop, on AC. You get to bite the
Yeah.
apple on different formats, and of course, it was later covered by R&B group As Yet.
Yeah. No matter how good the song is, you're talking about Peter Cetera's voice. That's a one of a kind voice. He's such a good singer, amazingly great singer. And they had before Foster came along, before I came along. "If You Leave Me Now" was a giant hit for them, and it was a ballad. So I think they had kind of swung over to becoming the ballad band.
Mhm.
So Hard to Say. People think that's on 17. No, it isn't. It's on 16. It was, but it really paved the way for the direction Chicago 17 was going to go on. 17 still selling records.
Yeah, selling like hotcakes and
Big record, yeah.
great, great, great songs, great
Hard Habit to
production.
Break was on that one. You're the Inspiration was on that one. Peter and David had probably a 10-year writing uh, run that was pretty amazing. I mean, they wrote some really, really good pop songs,
Right,
basically pop songs.
right.
And I think we lost Peter around, and then we did Chicago 18, where we got Jason in the band.
Mhm.
And Chicago 18, there's some songs on there. There's one by Randy Goodrum and Steve Kipner called "If She Would Have Been Faithful." We're
Mhm.
working on it for a private gig we're doing pretty soon.
Mhm.
Uh, Amazing, amazing music. And I think that's kind of where things ended up going. "Will You Still Love Me" was in that level, and I think kind of where the band was going was in more of a Foster direction. And I think that some of the guys in the band kind of were missing the old days. You know what I mean? I mean, look at the Beach Boys. They kind of railed pretty hard when they started bringing in the Wrecking Crew to play on the tracks.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
I agree.
except they brought in great records. So
Hmm. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, Brian was the bass player in the band, but he definitely used Carol Kay instead of him.
right.
He replaced himself. The first thing he replaced was himself.
Hmm.
And then for drums, I mean, Dennis was the drummer. Dennis Wilson was the drummer in the band, and he was a good drummer, but he wasn't what Hal Blaine was.
Right.
So all of these, and then you had all the guitar players, Tedesco. You had all of that. The Wrecking Crew was amazing. They're kind of what Toto at the time. They're kind of what the Toto rhythm section became a little later. Jeff Porcaro, Mike Porcaro, David Page, Steve Lukather. That
Right.
that hang right there. All great session guys, great readers. Uh, but with them, they actually had a band too, which was kind of really cool.
Right. Right. And talk about for me your work with Mr. George Benson.
Well, we Foster, not Foster, Jay and Lukather had written this track. Not even a track; they're just a piano and a doo doo da da vocal. You know what I mean? They had some of the melodies pretty well nailed. The only thing on we're talking about "Turn Your Love Around," and then Jay just handed it to me. He said, "We need lyrics for this." And so I went home and sat with a cassette for a couple of days and came up with the lyrics for "Turn Your Love Around." Then we did a demo of it and handed it to George, and George said, "Yep, let's do it." And the thing turned out to be a Grammy award winning song, R&B song of the year.
Yeah, one of my
As was After the Love Is Gone.
yeah, you definitely got the gramophone to prove it.
So, yeah, every 2 years I get 2 years apart from my Grammys. I went, well, I'm going to get one of these every 2 years. I was wrong, but
Hmm.
I got those two. So I was pretty happy with that.
Right. And I want to talk about the whole fusion period where acts like George Benson, George Duke, Aldro, guys who were considered jazz kind of made the shift to have more of a R&B lean. And do you think that shift kind of put guys who were traditionally pegged as jazz artists in a little bit of a what do we do? Do we roll with the times or do we stick with our guns and still
Right.
do what we did prior, but we know the direction that the industry is going in at the time, that's not what people want to hear. And that's not
Well,
what's
jazz is I think it's a great learning platform on a lot of levels for a lot of musicians. As it was for Jay, and Jay's a bebopper from the word go. He was playing bebop since he was a kid. The same thing holds true with David Foster, but I mean, there's not much money in it. I've worked with Joe Williams a lot, and his dad is John Williams, who did all the music for Star Wars and Indiana Jones and just about everything Spielberg's ever recorded, ever filmed. And John Williams it was Johnny Williams, and he was a jazz piano player. He just realized he had to do something different if he was gonna support his children, as it were. And so he went into to doing soundtrack composition, which he turned out he was as good. He's the big dog on the block. You know what I mean? And I think the same thing held true for a lot of these musicians. Like look at Herbie Hancock. His biggest hit is "Whip It," and Herbie played with Miles on "Miles in the Sky." I mean, he found a thing that he could do that would be a little more saleable
Mhm.
and a lot more fun to perform in a lot of ways than sitting there with a suit on and a tie and playing in a jazz trio,
Right.
which is musically probably the top of the thing. Hang on a second, I got to.
You go ahead.
Yeah, we're back. I like that girl's voice. This meeting is being recorded. I love it. Anyway, so I mean, jazz is that's what I think was what they called West Coast music, which I think now they're calling yacht rock, which is a phrase I don't like very much.
Why?
Yeah, I don't have a yacht. I don't even have a canoe. I don't, you know what I mean? Give me a break. Yacht rock my ass. But the West Coast music, I think, was a combination of pop music, a la Beach Boys, a la whoever was doing pop at the time, and then the addition of some jazz stuff added to it, and some R&B added to it, and put that together, mix it up, bake it, pull it out of the oven, and there you have West Coast music.
Yeah, because I listen to the Yacht Rock channel on Sirius XM on the regular. And when you think about acts like Ambrosia, Toto, Steely Dan, Michael McDonald,
Yeah,
all those different genres gets mixed up into that one big pot of soup. And it's a style and sound that is, I think it's gotten more appreciation now than it did then. But a lot of
very
people
very
still think of
possible.
it
Yeah.
as a dirty word. So why do you think it's such a dirty word to say yacht
I
rock?
think it's I think it's yacht rock. I think it's just I don't know who came up with it. There's a band out of Atlanta that called themselves Yacht Rock, and they learned some of my material and they nailed it to the wall perfectly. Did it really great, and these guys have been kind of backing up what we like to refer to as the fabulous formers, guys that used to sing in the bigger bands and stuff like that. I mean, I've worked with a handful of these musicians, and they're all really, really something. I mean, when you think about it, Steely Dan at the beginning of their career, I mean, they had dirty work. I don't want to do your dirty work. Oh, yeah. Pretty simple progressions. But somewhere along the line, music started taking them. And instead of following orders from their management, which means whatever you just got a hit on, keep writing that over and over again. Don and Walter just decided to go where the music seemed to be taking them. And suddenly there were all these beautiful progressions, all these great chord things going on. And that I think is probably, if nothing else, kind of the beginning of West Coast music.
Hmm.
Is Steely kind of waking up a little bit and going, hey, music's kind of taking us, in other words, just letting your creative juices flow instead of trying to stop them.
Hmm.
A lot of bands and artists that get really, really big, 90% of the time, their management's going to be saying, do this again.
Yeah.
Make it happen again. I mean, with Chicago, it was like "If You Leave Me Now" was a giant ballad. So I mean, we were stuck, and probably the band's still stuck in ballad land.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
That's kind of a tough thing when you're pigeonholed for doing something so well. And most
Yeah.
labels are really risk averse, where if they see something's
Yeah.
working, they're going to want a copycat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think of oh God, another name that just escaped me. The guy that did "Don't Worry, Be Happy."
Bobby McFerrin.
Bobby McFerrin. I mean, that guy was one of the best, and was one of the best singers in the world in terms of jazz singing. I mean, he could just sit there and keep time on his chest and just scare the hell out of you. Amazingly great musician, unbelievably great musician. And when "Don't Worry, Be Happy" came out, he did it as a joke. He kind of did it as a joke, and then him and Robin Williams did a video just as a joke, and his management released it as a single. It was a giant single, but that was the end of his kind of the end of his recording career. He went over, I think, to the St. Paul Symphony Orchestra and became their conductor for 4 years, 5 years. He
Mm,
just disappeared.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
what a great musician! What a great guy,
Y-
sweetie pie.
yeah.
Just a
Yeah. Didn't know that that record was meant to be like a one off, but it paid
yeah.
dividends. And like I
Well, I mean,
said,
he stacked all those parts himself vocally, which is all. It's not easy to do. I mean, I do a lot of stacking. A lot of different people do. Look at Jacob Collier. I mean, there's a guy that can stack till the cows come home.
mm,
Along with substitutions that are just that'll blow your mind. There's a lot of really good music out there. It's just a lot of it doesn't get to radio.
yeah, I agree. And with radio, there was a little medium that came out in 1981 called MTV, where they were focusing now on the visual as opposed to just the overall music. So, what was your take when MTV first came in and labels started to say, okay, we got to have the visuals to go with the songs, and you have to be video and TV ready?
Right. Well, I think some things in some ways probably helped out. I think ZZ Top did unbelievably great when using videos and that crazy little car that they use in all their videos, and just the whole thing kind of did well for them. But video really was Prince, Michael Jackson, and Madonna. That's it. That's pretty much what you heard for the most part. And I was kind of going when MTV came out. I went, uh-oh, there goes the neighborhood. We're getting TV people involved in this. I mean, it was hard enough dealing with A&R guys at record companies, but now we got TV guys.
Mm,
And some guy comes up with a concept for a video. They play the video, people hear the song, but they can't allow their own minds to come up with with their own creativity to find out to try to put the story together because they just got handed to them on television,
mm,
and you have to listen, you have to think of that before anything else. So it's videos is it's a double-edged sword. It can make or break.
mm,
When it first started out, there was like garage tapes. uh there's a song called Dog Police, which was funny as hell. And when people started using it as a comedy, a little bit as a comedy thing, I thought it was pretty cool. But for the most part, I don't know. I think it just took the world of music and just took it, yeah, took it down a little bit.
Mm,
What
where
I thought anyway.
yeah, because labels are looking at, okay, do you have the look before the music and everything else? The look became number one, everything else was secondary.
Exactly. Exactly. Suddenly you're making a record, you're auditioning.
Hmm.
Hey, I got a record deal. What am I auditioning for? To see how you can look and see how well you act in front of a camera and stuff like that. What does that have to do with the song I just wrote? You know. So and I think it's something that still is, that there's it's funny. My wife says, I want to start a production company called Embryo Productions. Let's get them younger. Let's get them younger, and even younger and younger and younger, and then suddenly you have really, really, really young artists, and
Right.
anybody else who's really kind of knows what they're doing and writes good songs and does a lot of really good stuff is just left it by the wayside because they might not do good television.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it kind of favors the young, the photogenic, and a lot of the older
Yeah.
artists
Oh
kind
yeah.
of get pushed out because you don't want to try to look 10, 20 years younger when that's not your age, and MTV is not really your demographic that they're reaching to. They're reaching 18 to 34 at the time when MTV was the brand new medium.
Nothing looks older than an old guy trying to look young.
At your age, people.
Yeah, just be what you are. I mean, I've kind of gone through all of these situations. I mean, we were in a band. I was in a band for 28 years with Chicago, and there was always like, well, you got to look this way, you got to do this, got to move, got to do this, got to do that. And at some point in the game, I realized I don't think that's what people are going to a Chicago gig for. They might be going to a Prince gig for that. They might be going to a Michael Jackson gig for that. Although both of them had great music.
Mhm.
I mean, Prince, ridiculous, genius. What a genius he was.
Right.
Amazingly great musician.
Yeah.
Underneath the fact that, but he understood right away that persona is very, very important.
Right,
You
right.
know,
And that brought me to my question. You said Prince, genius, and then the story goes that when he was showcasing his music to Mo Austin and the Suits at Warner Brothers, they originally wanted Maurice White to EP the debut album, but Prince was like, no, it's all me or nothing at all. And that takes a lot
exactly.
of cojones to tell the Suits, no, I'm doing
Yeah.
it my way or you ain't getting it.
Well, they got a compromise out of him. They said, "How about if we get you an engineer?" He says, "Who?" He said, "How about Tommy Vicari?" And I did an album. I had Tommy as the engineer on the album. Great engineer, really one of the best in the business. And Prince said, "Okay, I'll do that. I'll use the engineer." But then Prince ended up playing all the instruments, the drums. I don't think he even used click tracks. He just put down the drum track without even a metronome, as it were, and just stacked over it. And the guy was amazing. I mean, he really had an eyeball on what to do and how to make it work. And then his musicianship was ridiculous. It turned out to be one screamer guitar player.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
a
know, so
bad
he's. I
name.
mean, that's the thing about Prince and about I think Stevie Wonder. Uh, Stevie, at some point in the game, he could have gone, "Oh, I'm there already. I've had so many hits. I've got so many Grammys. I don't need to learn anything." He just keeps learning,
Right,
and he just keeps, the music it just keeps. It's like I was saying about Steely Dan. The music starts leading the charge,
right,
and those guys. I mean, those guys, even, I mean, they're amazing. Stevie Wonder, amazing,
right,
an amazing musician, and it's really all him. He learned to do this himself.
right. And I want to know what was your take when you heard Thriller for the first time?
I heard who?
Thriller, Michael Jackson.
Oh, I was way into Off the Wall. I thought that was a great album. So when Thriller came along, it was not really much of a surprise. In some ways, Off the Wall has got some cooler stuff on it than even Thriller. But I mean, Michael had a level of he had goals, and his goals were lofty, and it was a really, really high bar that he set. And I was talking to Jeff Porcaro one time. Jeff said I was doing a record with Michael, and I thought we were in a pocket. Michael came out and says, "Let me just stand here while you're playing it," and he just stood there and just kind of went, and Jeff said, "Oh my God, this guy just put the front end on it amazingly." If you listen to Michael Jackson's records, especially with Quincy, he's kind of on the front end of the groove, front end of the beat, just a little bit. So it's really energetic and forward motion. And a lot of artists, myself included, have a tendency to lean back just a little bit because right there it just feels really comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's a comfortable place to be. So, I mean, you're either running or walking, and either way, you get where you're going. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
Michael's Michael's groove, there was more him in there than a lot of people give him credit for.
Right. Yeah, because I prefer Off the Wall more so over Thriller. For
I
Off
do
the
too.
Wall, it was very, very pure R&B. And then when it got nominated for mostly R&B category awards, Mike was like, I'm going to create an album that's going to cross over. And that's
Right.
where we got the masterpiece of Thriller. Now with Rod Temperton, The Secret Sauce, Rod Temperton from Heatwave, I
Well,
believe. Go ahead.
Michael had when they did that Motown thing, and Michael had just I think he just released Off the Wall, or had just released Thriller, where he was one of the first times he performed on television in front of an audience by himself, and he tore the place apart. Tore the place apart, and everybody could see right then, like, oh boy, this is gonna fly. This career right here is just just put a 4 barrel in it and it's
Yeah.
cranking, you know what I
Yeah.
mean. And you could see it flying, the Thriller album, the Thriller video is, I mean, they spent time on it. The videos meant as much to Michael as the songs,
Hmm. Yeah,
maybe even more in some ways.
yeah, I agree because he was one of the first artists to really take the medium seriously, where I'm going to tell you a story instead of just going to a soundstage or going to a location, just put something together. He's telling you a full story and making it an event because when Thriller premiered, people were gathering around the TVs to see it, and there was no YouTube either. It was either you saw it then and there, or you missed it, or you had to wait X amount of hours for it to replay again.
Yeah. You didn't have to wait too long because that's about all they played for about the first 6 months that Thriller was out, was Michael Jackson music. I mean, he became the king of pop, and rightfully so. The guy's such a good dancer. He was such a great dancer that he put all of his talent into his project. He didn't say, "Well, leave the dancer at home. I'm going to be the singer now." He was like, "I'm going to do it all." I mean, somebody asked me once, "Well, do you like playing piano, or do you like playing guitar? Do you like singing?" I said, "Man, it's all the same. There's no
Mhm.
difference." To me, singing a lead vocal on a record is somewhat the same as putting new strings on your guitar. It's all part of the the, the same organic life that you live. It's like it all revolves around music. You know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and we mentioned Quincy Jones earlier. We just lost Quincy Jones, so can we just
Oh
talk
man,
about
what a
the legacy of Quincy Jones and what he meant to pop culture, music, film, different
dig
genres
his
and generations?
Yeah, did Quincy's arrangements on the live Frank Sinatra and Count Basie record at the Sands in Las Vegas years ago. Those were Quincy's arrangements.
Hmm.
Unbelievable. I mean, and it swung like a dog. Of course, the Basie band did nothing but swing. And
Hmm.
there was just something about that record that was, and believe me, I love Nelson Riddle, as does everybody. And he did really great on a lot of Sinatra's songs in terms of arranging. But that Quincy Jones arrangements on the Sinatra thing is pretty amazing. I mean, it put a stick up Sinatra's ass and got him swinging like a dog. I mean, and that record was I think it was a real keeper in terms of like kind of put him back on the map in terms of live performance.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Quincy's legacy and influence can't be understated.
Yeah,
And the one thing I appreciate about him, me being younger, is that he was really one of the first ones of that old school generation to really embrace rap by putting them on back on the block, and it won a Grammy for him. And he's saying,
yeah,
hey, this is the same as what we were doing then. Instead of shunning them, not hearing them, I'm going to be the bridge to bring both genres together and
yeah.
embrace the new and bring in the old.
So you're talking about the Dude album, right?
The Back on the Block album came out in '89 for
Yeah,
Quincy
I but I
Jones.
mean, I'll tell you, man, and also he discovered James Ingram, which
Oh
was like
yes.
what a set of pipes James had. Plus, he was a sweetie pie, nicest guy in the world. I worked for Quincy one time with me, Richard Page, James Ingram, and I think Steve George were the four singers on it. And it was on a Donna Summer record, and it was actually on a Richard Page song. It was really fun. I mean, Quincy had a different way of doing it than I'd ever done it.
Right.
So I was going, "Hey, Champlin, time to learn some new approaches.
Wow.
Check this out."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Quincy was
Had
just that
everybody sing
connector.
the same part and doubled, and then everybody went to the next part and doubled, and then went to the next part and doubled, and the vocals were just fat like nobody's business. It's just he's just had really good tricks up his sleeve. He's a guy's been recording for so long, he really knew his way around the block.
Yeah.
He
That
was
definitely,
really
definitely did.
he was
Definitely did.
really good. I mean, Quincy Jones was an amazing piece of work.
Yeah, one of a kind, a gem. And in your opinion, why do you think that with today's current state, you really don't have those legacy people that's working in production or working in the front offices? Do you think it's more so where because with the internet and how it shrinked the globe and it's all microwave to where we're not really having people in the offices saying, I'm gonna make artists that are going to be legacy brands as opposed to let's just see where the algorithm takes us and let's just make it for the moment, and there's not really that tie-in of I want to be an everlasting star that's going to still be playing out Vegas or touring because I have a body of work that says I've put in the work.
Well, I think a lot of those things are better covered by looking at management more, even more so than looking at the artist himself. And then you have guys like Michael or like Prince, who pretty much managed his own career. He had guys that they called managers, but he made the calls himself. I mean, I'm not a real big Neil Young fan. I never have been really that much, but I gotta hand it to him. Every record he does is different. There's something else coming on. It's coming from a different place, and I think it keeps him fresh.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of musicians, like that we were talking about before, do another album just like this, make it sound just like this. I mean, I've had A&R people saying, "I hear one song here, write me 9 more." Exactly like that. Wait a minute, I've already written that one. Or write one pretty close to it. Make sure that everything sounds the same because it's easier for me to market. It's easier for me to sell. And then you got Steely Dan that just goes crazy. I remember somebody after they got Record of the Year one year, and that record had Cousin Dupree on it. You know the song I'm talking about?
Hmm.
It's a bit controversial in a sense. You know what I mean? And the guy was saying, well, Mr. Dan writes a good song. This guy didn't know what he was talking about. He was just pissed off that Eminem didn't get the award that year,
Hmm.
and Steely got it instead. And he said, well, Mr. Dan writes a good song. He didn't even know who Steely Dan was.
Hmm.
But none of it's controversial. Is it Cousin Dupree's not controversial? Give me a break. Anyway, it's when press starts making the news, then you kind of know you're in some trouble at some level.
Yeah, and one thing with labels, it's hard when you're an artist when you're so focused on I want to make it my own way where you got a suit saying you got to turn in the draft by this time so we can have it out by quarter 3 or quarter 4. That's what made Janet Jackson's Control album so good was to where Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis got Janet out of LA, got her to Minneapolis so they could record and build organically, turn
And told
out
her to
being
keep her family out of the studio.
yep. Yep.
Keep your dad out of the studio to start with. That's just the nature of the thing. You know what I mean? It's weird.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing. But I mean, some look at there was a battle Stevie Wonder had when he wanted to do Music of My Mind. You know,
Hmm.
I don't think Barry Gordy wanted to do that. He wanted to go back and do the last record he did with his band guys, with the regular, with the regular guys that played on all Stevie's records, which was great.
Hmm.
All good players. Still to this day, one of my favorite tunes is off one of those albums. But Stevie wanted to do it himself, and he got together with Margalef and Cecil, and started really using synthesizers more so than anybody at the time.
Mm,
And then, and I think right on the heels of that, it was either that or I'm gonna have to go somewhere else. Barry, what do you think of that? And Barry finally said, "Okay, make your record." He did, and wham, boom, done. Superstition. Good night.
hmm
Good night, Gracie. It's all over. Same thing happened. Marvin Gaye kind of, went into the front office and said, "I want to do that." Oh, I don't know. I don't know whether you can. Well, what's going on?
hmm
He finally said, "Well, yeah, I got to do this. I got to start doing my own thing." So there's certain times in the music, in at least R&B history, where the guys took off. There was one point I heard a story. Now this is just a story I heard. It might be bullshit, but I'm going to tell it anyway. After Sly's Stand album came out, Berry Gordy had a meeting with all of his producers, engineers, and artists, and handed everybody a copy of that record. And says, "This is where we're going." And the next thing you know, Temptations had "Can't Get Next to You," Psychedelic Shack, Cloud Nine. Boom! Suddenly, the Sly influence was totally felt at Motown, because Motown, it's sort of like Disney locking in with Apple.
hmm
You know, at some point of the game, there's going to be a change, but sometimes it takes a lot of finagling in order to make the change.
Yeah, you definitely got to have the gumption to stand up for yourself and know, like, hey, I'm going to do it my way. I don't really need no interference because when you look at, I didn't know this until this Wham documentary came out that George Michael had cut a version of Careless Whisper produced by Jerry Wexler down at Muscle Shoals at the Fame Studios. And he was told Jerry Wexler, this is not the version of Careless Whisper I want to do. And he went back, recut it, and it became the classic hit we know today for Wham on "Make It Big."
Yeah, and George was another one of those guys that kind of really wanted to do it himself, and he was getting pressured to do. I think I'd heard a rumor that he was getting pressured to do songs that Mariah Carey chose not to do on her record, because Mariah Carey was married to the head of Sony Records at the time,
hmm
and George railed pretty hard.
hmm
He wasn't happy with that. He said, "No, I want to do my own stuff. I want to make my own stuff." And I think that's one that he actually lost in court.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you know as an artist when to stand up and play hardball and when to kind of acquiesce to the label and say we're gonna compromise?
Well, there's a word called juice. If you got enough juice to be able to do it your way, and there's a point in your career. I mean, nobody has a career where they got juice the whole career. If at the beginning of it, you might have to eat a little bit of what the record company's telling you to do, or you don't get the gig, you don't get the deal. Prince was one of the first guys to say, I'll go somewhere else. So Warner said, "Well, how about if we put an engineer with you?" So I mean, Prince, and Tommy Vicari actually went up to Sausalito, California, and cut the album at Record Plant
Wow.
in Sausalito. And it's funny that Tommy just posted the other day. Says there was one point where he was in working with Prince, and in walked Sly. He said, "Was seeing Prince and Sly was watching two generations of the same guy
Yeah, yeah, which
meeting
is
each other."
crazy.
And Prince was like knocked out. I mean, we're talking Sly. And later on, Prince was using two or three people from Sly's band.
Yeah, and mentioning Prince and Sly, when Sly, when you hear him, see him, and when you see Prince, you see the direct lineage between the
Yeah,
two.
yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine. I mean, I met a guy. I was just a kid, and I went to hear this band. It was a band called the Big Beats, and the sax player is a guy named Larry Randall, and he just said, "Well, let me give you some advice. Always steal. Just don't steal from the same guy all the time, right? If you
hmm
hear something that Willie Nelson did this morning, put it in your repertoire. Learn it. Do it. If you hear something from Luther Vandross, grab that. Whatever you can grab, if you like it, use it. Eventually, you're going to end up stealing so much stuff from so many people that eventually you're going to put a Willie Nelson vocal thing together with a Luther Vandross and a Frank Sinatra, and you're going to end up, and people will listen to it and go, "That's yours," and it is yours because you. I mean, there's Quincy said it once in court. Somebody was trying to sue, I think Michael or Stevie, somebody, and he says there's 12 notes. We use all 12 notes. There's only 12 notes.
Right.
So sometimes you'll have a progression. You might hit a couple of those notes, in sequence, and
Mm,
somebody else could say you stole it. That you didn't necessarily steal it. It's just that there's only 12 notes.
right. And you mentioned one of my favorite vocalists just now, Luther Vandross, and
Oh
just
God,
now
what a
realizing that most of his big records were covers, most of them coming from the Hal David Burt Bacharach catalog.
nothing wrong with that. There's some good writers there. I did a couple of background vocal dates with once for tune for Leo Sayer, and a couple things on Boz Scaggs' middle. It wasn't Middleman. I can't remember what album it was, but it was me and Luther and David. Uh, anyway, I forgot his last name. I'm sorry, my memory chops are down. But Luther was a fun guy to sing with. Boy, what an effortless singer! It just seamless. Boom,
Mm.
no break to deal with. He just goes right through it, right up. Unbelievably, really, really good singer. And he was a fun guy to hang with. He was a really good guy.
Yeah, it sounds like
He said, "This
flat-footed.
this this background part's too easy. We got to do steps."
Hmm. Yeah, sounds like he was.
Okay.
Yeah, sound like he was a flat-footed singer in one take, where go in the studio, cut it, and he's done.
Pretty much, I mean, I've done a few things. We did a big band album with Chicago one time, and Bruce Fairbairn, who was a really well known producer, said to me, he says, "How long does it take you to get a vocal?" And I was just giving him shit, right? I
Hmm.
just said, "How long's the song?" He just looked at me. He said, "I'm going to hold you to that." And I went in, and when we were doing vocals, I went in and I nailed one from top to bottom in one take. Rare for just about anybody. I mean, definitely for me, it's rare. I usually go back and fix here and there. But uh, he just said, "Wow, you were right." I said, yeah, but it ain't going to happen on all the tunes I'm singing. I can guarantee you that.
Right, right.
So I mean, this day and age, if it ain't right, you could run it through a tuner, auto tune or Melodyne or any of those things. I kind of like to do it the old fashioned way. Somebody asked me and Jason actually said, back in the day, what did you guys tune? How did you tune? And we always said, well, we recorded it. What do you mean? You didn't use a tuning machine? I said, no, we recorded. If it was out of tune, we cut it again until it was in tune. And that's the way. That's why vocals in the old days took a lot longer than they do nowadays. Nowadays, anybody can go in and do anything they want and just run it through a machine and it'll tune it up.
Hmm.
You can hear it. You can hear that it's been mechanically augmented, as it were.
Hmm.
But it's the nature of the bit. I don't. I mean, I got an auto tune in my Pro Tools system, but I don't use it very much.
Yeah. Yeah, and with technology, with digital, a lot of folks still wanting to get that old analog warm sound. Like if you're recording on a 4, 8, 16, 32 multi-track where you're recording on reel to reels. And also, what's your take on streaming and how it has changed to where the listener doesn't have that community experience of going to a record store, reading the liner notes, album credits, and sitting down and digesting a record where you could just click, upload, send, and not really have to go through sifting through a whole album like back then.
Well, first of all, the money from streaming, whatever money is going, is not, is not going to the musicians that are being streamed by any means. A little bit of it, but a very little bit of it. I think there was a song. I think I was on. It might have been on Pandora years and years ago. I think, and it was Lady Antebellum country group had, I don't know, 60 million streams. That means like one really big fan might listen to it 20 times. So it's not like a jukebox where there's just one. You heard it a bunch of times. The three writers of the song, it was a song of a year, one year. Three writers of the songs got, I think $6,000 to split three ways. And the head of the company had just sold the company for $9 million and had taken a gig as its new CEO for another $1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys made a lot of money selling my music for 0.0001 cent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It got out of control. Somehow something happened, and it's the commerce that got us, that the it might not have got us into the music business, but it definitely kept us in the music business. The commerce has been definitely one-sided, and it's going to everywhere but the musicians in a lot of ways.
Right. And now, what do you think needs to
So
happen to
that gets
make
a lot
sure?
of you. That gives you a lot of bitter musicians.
Yeah. So, what do you think needs to happen to change that? Is it because the language and the contracts wasn't there to calculate for the shift in technology and this new unknown revenue stream?
Absolutely, I think you nailed it to the wall. Nobody has a contract that says I got to get this much. And so somebody I think from Spotify actually talked to, I think it was Steve Lukather, and they said, "Look, we're paying out every time it gets streamed. It's just going through your record company, so we're not stealing it all. They're grabbing a bunch too. So by the time it gets to you, the guy who invented it and made it all happen, and paid for it, is getting the very 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 short end of the stick." And I think that's something it's been going on for so long. And most people, man, I'll go on Spotify. I just need the visibility. You know,
Hmm.
it's like club owners. You're really just doing it for the fun, aren't you? Which means he's about to give you a lower dollar amount.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what that that's what that means. You're just
Hmm.
doing it for the fun. Yeah, watch this.
Hmm.
So I mean, that's just the nature of commerce. It has changed to where certain people make the money that maybe shouldn't.
Yeah, it's still a dirty business. It's just done in a new
Oh yeah,
form, because when you first signed your recorded contract back in the day, you weren't going to have no leverage at all. You may be lucky if you sold a good amount of records and you can maybe renegotiate terms, but if not, labels will lock you in
right.
and they'll pull the bait and switch, say, okay, we'll give you this amount for points, we'll give you this here, that here, and we want X percentage of publishing for this Cadillac or
Right.
this other fancy thing that we're going to dangle in front of you. But I think the good thing now with technology is that I feel like a lot of the artists coming into the industry, they're more savvy to what's going on.
Yeah.
And with them being able to go direct to consumer, it cuts out the middleman, but at the same time, kills artist development to where labels want you already packaged, assembled, ready to go. And if you're on viral with TikTok and some of the other social media platforms, is
Yeah.
where you gotta attach them quick because of the attention spans now.
Somebody told me quite a few years ago, I think it was Jay Graydon was saying, he says, the record companies can't find you the first 20,000 sales. They can't find it. They can't get it. They can't access it. They can't make it happen. The band or the artist has to do that themselves. Once you do that, and then you got a record deal and stuff like that, if you got the first 20,000 sales, they can turn it into 10 million like that. Like, for instance, Hootie and the Blowfish. Somebody said, "Why did you sign those guys?" You know, because they sold out of the trunk of their car on these college dates they were playing. They sold 480,000 records themselves. So once they got a big record company involved in it, go boom, they could, double, triple, and quadruple that.
Right.
But that first initial sales, the band's got to do it themselves pretty much.
Right. Right. And that kind of ties back into earlier when I mentioned Hammer and how when Hammer put out the Power album, like you said, selling it out the trunk, and when he was making enough noise out in the Bay, Capital came knocking and said, "You're doing this by yourself? How about we come in and take you nationwide?" So it's almost
Yeah.
kind of like where you got to build your own fan base, have almost a regional following, at least back during that time. And the
Exactly.
labels came in and say, we're gonna distribute you nationally. We're just gonna take your regional album, put two
Yeah.
or three new songs on there, repackage it, and take you nationwide. And as we saw with Hammer, Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him, one of the first rap albums to go diamond.
Right. Yeah. Great. Big record.
Yeah,
A
definitely.
nice guy, from what I understand. He was a really cool dude, but
Mm-hmm.
spent an awful lot of money on a band for the road. I mean, just whatever he was making, he was spending performing with it. He wasn't really bringing home anything at some point in the
Mm-hmm.
game, which was really a drag. I mean, a friend of mine, Felton Pilot, who was in a group called Confunction, was the producer on some of the early Hammer stuff, and he just said it got out of control. Things just got nuts,
Wow.
and things can get nuts. This is the music business. This is crazy. I mean, I think TLC, which was they were making great records. I mean, Waterfalls was just, God, what a beautiful record that was. And but at the same time, they spent a lot of, they gave pieces of the action to so many people that after a while there was nothing left for them.
Yeah, because you have that infamous production deal where you think you're signed directly to the label, but
Yeah,
no, you're signed to the production company who has to deal with the label. So your
yeah,
money is their money, and after everybody gets paid out, you're left
yeah.
to split the crumbs or whatever's left, if
Well,
any.
production companies, you got to be a little careful. That's why a lot of, like if you look at movies and everything, anybody that has any juice, any actor that has any, like I was saying before, juice, has a certain following already, has a lot of them will take a gig acting in a movie, but they'll say, yeah, I want to be part of the production team. I want to be a producer of this movie, and the producers get the lion's share of the money. I mean, producer in records, it's almost like a director would be in movies, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I know that's definitely the way David Foster did it. He was called a producer, but he was really directing it. I mean, and also playing it and writing it, and forget about it. Just one of the giants of our time. But anybody who has any juice usually can figure a way at some point of the game to get a little bigger piece of the action
Mhm.
compared to what was going on before. If you have a certain amount of juice before you sign a record deal, then you can get higher points.
Mhm. Build a buzz and
Yeah,
have them
because
come to you.
you're worth what you're bringing to the record company is you're bringing your own following.
Mhm.
The record company, I mean, what they're going to do is pat themselves on the back for selling what you've already sold. you
Mhm.
know I mean, you've already sold it. The only thing that you haven't sold was the record, the actual piece itself, whether it be the download or the CD, or somebody said, hey, you ever record on tape? I said, are you kidding? I did my first album on smoke signal. How far back that goes.
Oh man, so what's your take on vinyl making a resurgence? Because we're seeing that a lot of the younger generation they're rediscovering vinyl and even going with cassettes. So what's your take on seeing that younger generation wanting to rediscover those older forms of medium?
Well, they've rediscovered a lot of the music. A lot of the music from what we would refer to as back in the day, at least in my day, and at any rate, a lot of the music has been rediscovered by younger audiences. I think they want to hear it the way we heard it. That's probably what it is. I like CDs just because they're small, but
Hmm.
I'm not a real download guy. I don't run around with pockets full of flash drives. You know what I mean? It's just
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. It kind of depends on the era that you're living in. I mean, I'm kind of an old school guy.
Yeah, I kind of consider myself that as well. Kind of came up with that blend of last bit of analog with vinyl, cassette, CDs, and then seeing digital at the forefront,
Right.
and get that mix. So last thing, and I'm gonna
Well,
get to
the
ask.
first digital machines, like Mitsubishi and Sony, I think had 32 track digital tape, but it was all
Mhm,
16-bit. I mean, you go into Pro Tools, you can go 24-bit, you can go 48-bit, you can go 96, you can go crazy. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
right.
Uh, just in terms of overall bandwidth,
Mhm,
you know. And I think that there's something about albums. I mean, I've found that when I record like three-part stuff on digital, it's really, you got to be really careful with how you blend it, because one could get louder than the other one when it shouldn't.
Mhm.
Whereas you go to tape, it almost blends itself.
Right.
It's a lot easier. The stuff comes out a lot easier. But going from studio to studio with 150 pounds of 24 track tape reels,
Mhm.
it can be a little bit of a pain in the ass. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. What was your take when the synthesizers and everything started coming to play? And a lot of bands were kind of saying, oh, we're kind of getting phased out for this one thing that can do all that we
Right.
can do.
I got synthesizers that do all kinds of stuff. I usually end up with piano, Rhodes, clavinet, Wurlitzer, and organ. That's it. And I've got a Hammond C3 sitting right next to my Pro Tools rig in the guest house.
Wow.
So if when I want to do organ, I can just, I'd used to be I would do a portable B3 for an organ part and then go replace it with a real organ at somebody else's studio. Now I got it. My son helped me put the C3 in there, so I've got it to where take one can be the organ.
Wow. That's definitely great. I always look at it
I
as,
love the B3. I mean, I'm sorry, but
oh, no,
that's
go ahead.
I'm probably primarily known as a B3 as a singer to start with, but as a B3 player next.
Yeah, because I always look at it as embrace the technology that's coming in because technology is always going to be changing. And
Yeah.
that was a lesson that the industry didn't catch on till later when Napster and everything started coming in because everybody was getting over like a fat rat in the cheese factory with all the album sales that once they saw that Napster shook up the tree, that they were like, oh, this is going to stop this gravy train.
Changed the world. And boy, the movie people were looking at the music's going, oh, you guys are getting screwed. But guess what? The memories are so big now that movie people are getting screwed now. And
Hmm.
it's just the nature of, look at AI is gonna do it again. It's gonna screw all of us at some level, just because the nature of it. Listen, Gerald, I got to get moving. I've really been a good hang with you, man. I love it, but I got to kind of get
Yeah.
going.
Oh yeah. One last thing.
Yes,
Any
sir.
current projects you're working on and plug your socials.
Well, if anybody wants a really good album, I did a solo album about a couple of years ago, and it's called "Living for Love." Bill Champlin, "Living for Love," and it's available as a download. Not well as a download. I think it's on Spotify. I hate to say it, but it's also CDs available on BillChamplin.com.
And you can catch them there. You can catch this interview wherever you stream podcasts and on the official YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Album Cover. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big thank you to Bill Champlin for coming on Beyond the Album Cover. Bill, it's been a pleasure and you're welcome to come back anytime.
Thanks, Gerald. It's good to talk to you.
Yes, sir.